In this video, we're going to look at the infamous notes that were gathered from Lucy Letby's property in Westbourne Road, Chester. This included a green note that has become infamous due to its being cited as a confession note during the court case. However, several other notes were also collected from Lucy Letby's property, and we're going to examine all of those notes in this video as well. But we're going to begin by looking at the green note because that has been the one that has been overwhelmingly cited both by the media and in court as containing what are considered confessional statements. So the first note we're going to look at is this green note that contains a couple of phrases that have become very well known indeed. One of them is Lucy Letby stating that she's evil and that she did this. And the other one is this statement that you can see here, roughly where the mouse cursor is: I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough. Now, there's been a lot of analysis of this note, and I know that there have been attempts online to demonstrate that perhaps what she's doing with her writing in this note is having a narrative conversation with herself, and that when she says, I did this, she is saying essentially, they say that I did this. I don't in any way disagree with that interpretation. It's not one that I have relied on personally because I can't really say definitively that it's true. I just like to look at the content of the note as a whole and assess the note on that basis. So we're going to examine 6 notes in total in this video, and there is literally almost nothing in any of those notes to indicate any form of anything that could even be remotely construed as expressions of guilt, while there is an enormous amount of content that points to the complete opposite. But if we're going to look at this notion of her deliberately killing infants, then there are so many statements that indicate that the notes are not an expression of this. But just for example here, on the right hand side of the note, we see the expression, why me? So there's just no conceivable way that she would write that, because if she'd killed infants and that this note was an expression of the fact that she had deliberately killed infants, that statement would make no sense. She wouldn't be saying, why me? She would know damn well why she was in trouble. She could be saying all kinds of different things. In another video in the future, I want to show you what other serial killers and other people that have committed extreme crimes have put in their writing, because I've studied several cases in depth, and that's part of the reason I became interested in this case, because I have kind of an amateur interest in criminology. But you'll see that their notes are completely different, and what you will very rarely get with serial killers is sometimes they will express a kind of generalized remorse. Sometimes they don't express any remorse at all, but sometimes they will express a kind of generalized remorse about the disintegration of their mental state, the macabre acts that they've become immersed in. But they very rarely kind of express remorse towards individuals, and particularly, obviously, their victims. So I will go over this more in a future video, but I want you to bear that in mind as we go through these notes. But I want to begin this analysis by looking at this expression, I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough. Now, that seems to be a fairly self-explanatory expression to me, but I do appreciate that it contains the expression, I killed them on purpose, and naturally you can misconstrue that for her as being a confession or as being confessional. How I would interpret this expression and I did this when I began my journey of investigating this case. This would have been one of the first pieces of evidence that I saw. So I knew very, very quickly, obviously I'm a writer. I think that's been established that I've been writing for a long time. And I just knew instantly that this is not a confession note. it would be generous to say that it took me 10 seconds to realise that. But even when I looked at it, it's very obvious to me that the expression, I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough, is indicating that she feels a sense of guilt about what occurred because she thinks she's failed as a nurse and she thinks she's not a good enough nurse. Essentially, as well, it's a very kind of female response to something like this, in my opinion. This is it's kind of a very usual female response to have feelings of guilt, to have feelings of self-recrimination, whereas a man in the same situation might come out fighting. I think that a much more natural male reaction would to be bombastic and think, why the hell have they thrown me off the unit? I haven't done anything wrong. This is an absolute disgrace, etc., etc. There are men in powerful positions in the public eye. You can easily imagine responding that way. And some of them, I won't name any names, but some of them, you can't imagine them ever saying, actually, I was in the wrong there. But this is a much more natural female response. So obviously, not all men are that bad, but we would have more of a tendency psychologically and emotionally to respond in that way, whereas a female is more inclined to feel guilt, more inclined to feel self-recrimination, more inclined to blame herself. So for me, that phrase was instantly very, very clear. But we're now going to examine the evidence related to this in more depth. So firstly, this not good enough expression was used in one of the text messages that was exhibited in court. This is an account of this from the media. Text messages were exchanged between Lucy Letby and a doctor on the 25th of June 2016. Letby expressed, "We've lost 2 babies I was caring for and now this occurred today. It makes you ponder, am I missing something or am I not good enough?" The doctor replied, "If anyone suggests to you that you are not good enough or not performing adequately, I want you to promise me that you will provide my contact information to give a statement." So this is a repetition of this not good enough expression in precisely the context that I've just indicated. It's the idea that she's a not good enough nurse, and she's obviously repeated that expression in the green note that's been taken to be a confession note, but clearly isn't. And then when Lucy was being interviewed by the police, she was asked about this note and she said the following: "I just wrote it because everything had got on top of me. It was when I'd not long found out I'd been removed from the unit and they were telling me my practice might be wrong, that I needed to read all my competencies. My practice might not have been good enough." Let's repeat that for you. My practice might not have been good enough. I was blaming myself, but not because I'd done something, but because of the way people were making me feel. So you couldn't have a more crystal clear explanation of this note. It's almost a perfect expression of what she was feeling that we can see when we look at the note. And also, obviously, she's used the not good enough expression. Of course, the police didn't pay any attention to this whatsoever. They didn't realise that nothing that they'd recovered from her property had any merit as evidence whatsoever. They just pressed on with the investigation. So hopefully they'll pay the price for this one day, because they have proven themselves to be grossly incompetent. So the other thing that I think people should consider about this is that nurses carry a lot of emotion with them. And when things go wrong, it's very natural for them to feel guilty. I've never been in the situation, and I'm sure most non-medical professionals listening to this audio and watching this video have been in this position either. But when you lose a patient, it must be, and I'm sure it is, a very harrowing experience. And you're very naturally going to feel a sense of guilt, because I suppose some people go into the healthcare profession because of a sense of duty or sense of pressure on the family. But I would still think most people go into it because they want to help people, they want to make people better, they want to make a difference, they want to make a positive difference. There can be nothing worse than having a patient and that patient passes away. And then, of course, it's even more emotional when it's a very small, very young, very vulnerable infant. So this response is not in any way unusual. If you speak with nurses, they will tell you that this sort of soul searching occurs all the time, and it's very normal when a patient passes away for a nurse or a doctor as well to reflect on whether or not it's their fault, whether or not they could have done anything differently, whether they could have done anything better. Exactly what Lucy's reflecting on here and exactly what she's told the police. So now we're going to go over some of the court transcripts. This is Ben Myers speaking with Lucy Letby in court. And it begins with Ben Myers saying, "We've all seen various notes that were taken by the police that you had written. You know the notes I'm referring to, don't you?" And Lucy Letby says, "Yes. We're going to look at a number of them as we're going through your evidence, Miss Letby, not all in one go, but at various points. But just to help the jury with this in general, are you the sort of person who writes things down in notes or on notes?" "Yes, it's something I've done my whole life. That's my way of dealing with things just day to day. That is what I've always done. I've always written things down." "And do you throw them away? Do you always throw them away when you've written things down?" "No, I never throw anything away. I have difficulties throwing things away. Everything is just kept." So obviously that feeds into things that we've discussed in previous videos in relation to handover notes and the fact that she had so many of them. Obviously she had problems throwing things away, so she just used to keep things. Typical kind of hoarding behaviour, I guess. Right, let's look at the note which we've got in the images the prosecution gave us. It's the prosecution image, page 18. We'll see if Mr. Murphy can help us with that. We'll look at a close-up in a moment, but I'm going to ask you some questions about the note that's on the right-hand side of this page, Miss Letby. What are notes like this in your house? Or is it just how they've been arranged for the purposes of photographing it? No, that's how it's been arranged. So the police have set it out so we can see it for the photograph. Yes. So I think what he's trying to get at there is that this note wasn't on display in the house. It wasn't pinned up or something like that. It wasn't it wasn't arranged on a notice board. It was just of no importance to her. He probably could have made that a little bit clearer, but the point stands nevertheless. So then he goes on to say, "Do you know when it was? Can we go to page 19, in fact, Mr. Murphy, so we can see the note more clearly? Thank you. We'll have a look at this in a moment, Miss Letby. But do you recall when it was you would have written this? What period of time? After my removal from the unit in 2016 and prior to my arrest, this time. Do you know any precise date when you wrote it? No." We're going to have a look at what's written here. Look at the top if you would. It says "not good enough." So I was going to highlight this myself. This "not good enough" phrase is written at the very top of the green note, indicating that it's a key phrase, obviously, in the entire note. Why have you written "not good enough" and underlined it? I think that's the overwhelming thought and feelings I had about myself at that point, that I wasn't good enough. And why did you think you weren't good enough? Because of the way people had made me feel. Had you actually done anything wrong to hurt any babies? No. How were you feeling because of the things that people were saying about you? I felt an immense responsibility. I thought that I'd been incompetent or done something wrong that had harmed children. When we're looking at the notes, is it the case you've always written everything we see on them on one occasion, or are they sometimes written at different times, bits of the notes? It can be both. So I'm not sure this was followed up on, but the point is that this wasn't all necessarily written as one stream of consciousness. It can be a combination of various entries at various pieces in time, at various points in time, but it's been taken as one singular note, when in actual fact it's not necessarily that at all. And that would then fit in with other interpretations of the note that we've seen online, that she is filling it in over a period of time and saying, "Oh look, the police have said this about me, or the hospital have said this about me, blah, 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 blah." So that's another interesting aspect of this, quite aside from the fact that she's making these explicit comments about not being good enough, about not feeling her practice was good enough, about people making her feel she was incompetent or inadequate, and that the note is essentially an overwhelming, to use her word, expression of this. So a little later on in proceedings, Ben Myers goes on to discuss this "not good enough" expression. Now, I've realised recently that he actually did a better job on the notes than I thought he did. I still think he could have done better, and I still think he could have done more, and I think he could have been more forceful. And I think generally his method of presentation was a little bit subtle and therefore didn't cut through to the jury in the way that it perhaps could have done. And I think there were things that he could have done differently here for sure. However, he did spend more time on the notes and he did go into more detail than I'd initially believed. But I'll come back to that topic in a second. First of all, we're going to go on to what they said about this specific expression of being not good enough. So Ben Meyer says, then does it say, I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough? Yes. Was there anything that follows on for that? Because I'm not good enough, does it stop or does it carry on? I'm not good enough to care for them and I'm a horrible, evil person. Right. When you say kill them on purpose, does that mean you've gone and done something intentionally to harm them and kill them? No. What are you meaning when you say, I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough to care for them? That I hadn't been good enough and I'd in some way failed in my duties and my competencies. Why did you think you hadn't, or you might not have been good enough? Because that was the suggestion throughout, that I had to redo my competencies, that I'd been removed from the unit. I felt that I'd done something wrong. That was what was insinuated to me, that my competencies had to be rechecked. So this is a very clear explanation that is in line with exactly what I thought as soon as I saw the note. And it's very much, I did this, this expression of I killed them on purpose is a very unfortunate choice of phrase that she's used. But the next part of the sentence, because I'm not good enough to care for them, is the critical qualifier of that sentence. And as we'll see in the remainder of the video, if you look at the notes in their totality, it's very clear that the second half and the longer part of the sentence is the significant part, because everything else is consistent with that. Everything else is consistent with it being in a state of despair and anguish. None of the rest of the notes, including the green note, and we're going to go over this in a second, none of the rest of the notes in any way are even remotely consistent with the idea that they're a confession. So it's very important to look at this not good enough comment. We've looked at several different instances and aspects that point to it being this explanation of I'm not a good enough nurse and that's why they've died and it's my fault and I should have been more competent on the unit and that's why I've been withdrawn from the unit, etc., etc. It's very clear that this is what was meant by this expression. So the reason that people perhaps have a false impression of this note, although a lot of people now realise that it's not a confession note, is the reporting at the time was so one-sided. So we saw many headlines such as this one, Lucy Letby trial, I am evil, I did this. Read the confession note written by nurse accused of murdering 7 babies. On day 4 of the Lucy Letby trial, the court was shown a piece of paper on which she had written, I don't deserve to live, I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough. But even that's in the subheadline. And then if you look at the article itself, all of this bit at the start is all about how she's evil in the prosecution case. All of this bit is she denies the charges again. As I mentioned in the BBC video, this word denies. And then there's a bit about the defence. This bit's about the defence. And a bit here as well. He blamed, the word blamed, it's negative again. And they're still talking here. But they've gone away from talking about the notes now. So the overwhelming impression of the notes that has been communicated is regarding what the prosecution alleged. And then after this, he'll put up to here as the defence, then we go all the way down here. This is all prosecution, all the way down to the end. So again, this is 2/3 prosecution. As we went through all those articles, looking at the BBC's coverage, the overwhelming impression you would get from this is that this is a confession note. This woman is guilty. This woman is a murderer. She's trying to, she's denying the charges. She's blaming other things. The whole impression is stacked against Lucy Letby once again. And that's why so many people still talk about the notes. And that's why I've decided to make this video. I've shied away from doing it because there's other things that have been covered less. And these notes have absolutely no evidential value whatsoever, and they're clearly not a confession. But I felt I needed to do something because people still mention them. They've been mentioning them on TikTok. They mention them on YouTube occasionally, although I get more the handover sheets on YouTube. But I wanted to make sure that I made this video just to show in detail that there's no way this is a confession. So I do think the primary reason people still believe that is because of reporting like this, which I consider to be unbalanced and irresponsible, essentially. So rather than read through the entirety of the Green Note, because it is quite disjointed and was quite possibly written at different times, as we've discussed, I've picked out all of the expressions here that indicate the complete opposite to it being a confession note. And as you'll see, they far outnumber anything in that note that would possibly indicate that it's a confession. Obviously, I've dealt with the one specific statement that references this. But we see Lucy saying, right at the top, underlined, as mentioned by Ben Myers in court, this not good enough expression. And then she goes on to say, there are no words. I can't breathe. I can't focus. Kill myself right now. Overwhelming fear. No hope. I'll never have children. I haven't done anything wrong. Never have children or marry. Never know what it's like to have a family. Slander, discrimination, victimization, all getting too much, taking over my life, everything. Hate myself so much. Despair, panic, fear, lost. I feel very alone and scared. What does the future hold? How can I get through it? I don't deserve to live. I don't deserve mum and dad. They are better off without me. Now, I will ask you sincerely, is this the language of a psychopath who has killed infants on a neonatal unit for some utterly nonsensical reason? Because even in court, the prosecution couldn't come up with a feasible motive. They tried to make some claim about wanting to get attention from a doctor. I mean, that was utterly ridiculous. It wasn't even followed through on properly because there was just no basis for it whatsoever. Or are these rather the kind of self-recriminations, these feelings of guilt, these feelings of inadequacy, feelings of anguish and despair? That is what this note is an expression of. This note is not an expression of guilt in terms of being guilty of murdering children. Absolutely not. There's just no support for that whatsoever. Everything points to this being Lucy going through a process of despair and trauma. And there are numerous statements here that indicate innocence. And we're going to see further statements that also indicate innocence in notes that we're going to examine later in the video. As I mentioned, it's very normal for nurses to experience these feelings of self-recrimination, particularly when patients have died. You know, I've never been in that situation, but it must be horrible. It must be a horrible experience to think, it's my job to save this infant's life. I have failed. This infant has died. And then you've got to go through the horrible experience of being with the parents. It's awful. And you can see from these comments that some of the remarks and some of the amateur diagnoses that have been made of Lucy, that she has, she's a psychopath, or another one that's made in Judith Morit's book is that she has borderline personality disorder. Now, I've assessed this in my book, and I've got psychiatrists to look at her and examine what we know about her. There's no evidence of borderline personality disorder whatsoever. Absolute rubbish. What we're seeing here in this note is, as was described by Ben Myers in court, as a deeply anguished woman who is going through a hellish experience. What she doesn't realise at this stage is that it's going to get much, much worse. But there's just nothing in this green note to indicate that it's a confession. It's not a confession note. And then I should mention on top of that, leaving aside the actual content, there's nothing about it that would indicate that it's a confession. There's no specific references to anything. It's very generalised language, and there's certainly no references to any specific murders. There's no sense that it's an important note. It's just scribbled on a piece of paper. Lucy said even that she contributed to this note at different times. It's not written in the way that one would usually write a confession. There's nothing about it that points to it being a confession, and there's a lot about it that points to it not being a confession. And this is all before you go into the now infamous article in The Guardian, which notes that the so-called confessions of Lucy Letby were written on the advice of counsellors. We know that counsellor to be Kathryn de Beger. The Guardian article mentions its sources in this article, I should probably say that I've spoken to those sources and I know for a fact that this is correct. So there's been some question marks. Obviously, this has no credibility, but there's been some question marks as to whether this is correct. I know for a fact that this is correct. So I will read through this article. There have been mounting questions in recent weeks over the safety of Letby's conviction against the backdrop of a public inquiry that is set to begin receiving evidence next week, of course referring to the Thirlwell inquiry. A group of leading experts have called on the government to postpone or change the terms of reference for the inquiry over these concerns, including questions about some of the evidence presented at trial. Of course, we know that didn't happen. Sources close to the case have told The Guardian that the Council of Chester Hospital's own head of occupational health and wellbeing, Kathryn de Beger, encouraged Letby to write down her feelings as a way of coping with extreme stress. Letby's Chester GP also advised her to write down thoughts she was struggling to process, according to these sources. David Wilson, a professor of criminology at Birmingham City University who specialises in serial killers, said in his view the so-called confession notes were meaningless and had no value as evidence, particularly if they had been written as part of counselling. Many people will say things when they are under stress and feeling bereft that seem to imply one thing but mean nothing at all other than reflecting the underlying stress. I always thought Letby's notes were meaningless as evidence. If they were written as part of therapy, you can underline that point 3 times and write it in bold and capital letters, he added. So I'll continue to read this before we discuss this. The prosecution's presentation of the notes was a key gotcha moment, according to Wilson. From his experience of trials, such moments tended to set the narrative for the whole proceedings. He believed they could have been very influential on the jury, especially when other evidence was technical and hard to understand. Such moments catch the jury's attention, and once you've caught it, it is really hard in our adversarial legal system to present alternatives successfully, he added. So I've always believed that this note was absolutely critical, and there's some confirmation of that there. I think that's pretty much undeniable anyway, and it was certainly exhibited quite prominently by the prosecution. The other thing I'll mention is David Wilson speaking, who went on Australian television recently to say that he believes that Lucy Letby is guilty. So even he is saying these notes have no value whatsoever. I don't have a high opinion of Professor David Wilson, but he has said a few useful things. Why he didn't mention this on Australian TV is very difficult to understand. Obviously, he seems primarily concerned with preserving his own television career. It's a shame that he hasn't bothered to investigate any of the case, and it's a shame that he didn't have anything of any relevance to say during his most recent television appearance. But here, he has said something relevant about the notes. So that actually makes his critique stronger, because he's not a supporter of this being a miscarriage of justice for some bizarre reason. As I say, the most likely one is simply that he wants to be on TV. Journaling or writing down disturbing thoughts is encouraged in general psychotherapy, according to Richard Curran, the chair of the Forensic Psychotherapy Society, who has worked as an expert witness and with victims and offenders for 25 years. Doodling, journaling, is a way of taking control of your thoughts. I don't think it relates to a confession of any kind, he said. He added that Letby's response on the notes in court was robust and seems right. She wrote down how she was being made to feel. It's useful to put words on paper to short-circuit overthinking when there's a whirlpool of really confusing and disturbing thoughts going round and round in your head. Once they are externalised, you can maybe put them to one side and carry on with what needs your attention. Now, I want people who are watching and listening to this to remember that phrase of a whirlpool of really confusing and disturbing thoughts, because I think that's an excellent description of what we see across the totality of these notes. And that is evident in the green note, but I would say it becomes even more evident as we look at some of the other notes. So now that's the totality of the article relating to Kathryn de Beger and Lucy's counselling sessions, where she's been advised to engage in this cognitive behavioural therapy technique. Now we're going to go over the other things that we know about Kathryn de Beger from the Thirlwell inquiry. I've put up title pages for some of these documents. This was one document where Thirlwell failed to post a title page. But these are comments from Kathryn de Beger made shortly after the time, so 19th of October 2016. So this would have been in October 2016. It says in this comment that she's seen her this morning. So this we can say confidently this email is from the 19th of October 2016. As you are aware, I have been seeing Lucy over the last few months to offer her occupational health support. I have seen her this morning and she has agreed for me to communicate with you following our meeting together. I do have concerns today about Lucy's health and well-being. Lucy is really struggling with the length of time she has been away working from the neonatal unit, the lengthy process, and as yet still no date to return to her substantive post. She's feeling isolated from her team, and the ongoing uncertainty of the outcome is causing high levels of anxiety. The current situation is having a detrimental effect on her health and well-being, and I have concerns for her health both for the short and longer term. I would appreciate your advice on how the Trust can expedite an outcome and conclusion so I can help Lucy plan the way forward. So we can see this state of mind that Kathryn de Beger is talking about reflected very clearly in the notes. And Kathryn de Beger also makes it clear that Lucy never gave any indication whatsoever that she may have committed any criminal offence or done anything wrong. I believe that's referenced in one of the documents that is still to come. So the next document is INQ0063777, which is email correspondence between Kathryn de Beger and Lucy in April 2017. And Kathryn de Beger is saying to Lucy here, remember what Sue and Alison said, it is not about you, they just state clinical concerns. I know it's hard, but you mustn't overthink things. All of your feelings are normal in this very stressful situation. You will be feeling a mixture of thoughts and emotions, which again is all very normal, but let's try to keep them all in check, however hard that is, as it will be better in the long term. So it must be heartbreaking for Kathryn, who's been not said a word against Lucy, that obviously things weren't better in the long term. They got worse and worse, and this is very shortly before the case is referred to the police. And then there's another discussion here. Hi Lucy, let's meet up after your team meeting. Come down when you are ready, or if you don't want to attend the team meeting, come at 1 p.m. I understand why you are feeling like you are, but you have all the reassurances that the execs and us support you returning to the neonatal unit, and that is where you belong, and we need to hold on to that. Let's talk on Thursday. So a fairly heartbreaking message considering the context of what we know happened since then. And this is INQ0002797, and this is a meeting between Alison Kelly, Lucy Letby, Karen Rees, Hayley Cooper, Kathryn de Beger and Sue Hockinson. Note that Lucy is dehumanised to such an extent that we can't say her first name. We can't say it's a meeting between Alison Kelly, Lucy Letby, Karen Rees. No, it has to be Alison Kelly, Letby and Karen Rees, which I think is fairly embarrassing for the Thirlwell inquiry. So there's nothing that interesting in this particular document, not compared to the others. But the reason that I'm highlighting this is that this was on the 4th of May 2017. This is one day. This is already, in fact, the case has already been referred to the police at this point. This is one day before the police hold their initial meeting, but it's 2 days after the case has been referred to the police. So I want to look at what was mentioned in this document before I discuss the significance of this. So this is Kathryn de Beger speaking now. Hayley then added how you had both been informed by 2 different sources that Dr. Berry was leaving the trust. Now, that's not mentioned anywhere else, so that's an interesting piece of information in itself, but that's not the reason I'm reading this out. Alison and I explained that we were not aware of this information. In addition, Kathryn explained that she had some concerns in relation to the completion of the mediation with Dr. Jairam. She advised that as part of mediation, the second part of the process required both parties to sign an agreement on agreed ways of working together, and that this was returned to Jane, the mediator. Kathryn added that the mediation had not been concluded as Dr. Jairam had not signed off the agreement, whereas you had, and that it appeared from following up with Jane that he hadn't forgotten to undertake this process. I asked Kathryn if we understand the reasons why, and Kathryn explained that she was looking into this. I also advised you both that Alison and I would follow up on this information too. So I want you to bear in mind, this is on the 4th of May 2017. As I say, the case has been referred to the police. The police will have their initial meeting and assessment that launches Operation Hummingbird the day after this. There is no indication here that all of the major nursing staff at the hospital are aware that this case has been referred to the police. They're still preparing for Lucy to go back onto the unit. There's no mention that Lucy is now being fingered as a criminal. Lucy's now been referred to the police. They're just talking about mediation and that Dr. Jairam has not signed off on something. So you can draw your own conclusions from that. What obviously it's indicative of, firstly, is a complete lack of joined up thinking or communication at the hospital. I'm not really sure what else to say about it. It seems ludicrous, embarrassing, dysfunctional that you can have a situation where the nursing team are preparing to put Lucy back on the unit and the management has been corralled into referring the case to the police and treating her as a criminal. But that was literally the situation at the hospital. The next document we'll look at is INQ 0017911. This is a witness statement of Kathryn de Beger from the Thirlwell inquiry. So this was written in August 2018, seemingly, which is quite early for a witness statement, but I think it's a very interesting document that it doesn't exonerate Lucy, but it indicates that Kathryn de Beger has no concerns and continues to be supportive of Lucy to this day. Unfortunately, it's going to be very difficult for her to speak out because I believe she's still employed by the Countess of Chester, but she was extremely brave in the Thirlwell inquiry, and again, didn't say a word against Lucy and defended her to some extent, which was really noble considering not only her position she's in, not only the pressure, but also the fact that she is, as I say, is still employed by the Trust as far as I'm aware. So she said the following things. The first thing I want you to note is that this is just page 7 of 8. So we haven't seen pages 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 8. So people have said she doesn't mention the note. But firstly, when she was interviewed in Thirlwell, she wasn't asked about the note at all. So she just gave direct questions to the questions she was asked. I suspect the reason she wasn't asked about the note was because she could have revealed what we know to be the case anyway. And secondly, we haven't seen 7 of her 8 pages from this statement. They've just been suppressed. In addition to that, it looks like even statements have been suppressed from this statement because it's presented in a very strange way, but I'll come on to that in a second. At no time did Lucy tell me anything which required me to contact someone more senior in the hospital or the police. I work under a strict code where if anyone ever tells me anything that is harmful to themselves or others, then I will disclose it to others. I have documented in my notes after meetings with Lucy the general coping advice I gave to her. The notes are all to do with Lucy's welfare, supporting her the best I could during an extraordinarily difficult time. Lucy did ask for meetings with me on anniversaries of some of the babies' deaths as she was particularly distressed. Lucy informed me that's why she'd come to see me as she was having a bad week. No specific names were mentioned, and the day of the meeting in my notes would be around an anniversary date of one of the deaths. During these meetings, Lucy did speak to me about the parents of the babies. She felt distressed and upset, but how much more distressed and upset the parents must be feeling because they had lost their babies. These conversations were around the times of the anniversary dates, probably July 2017. Lucy did not mention any parents in particular. She also talked often about the consultants involved. She couldn't understand why they were accusing her. She thought they must hate her so much to do this to her. She talked about consultants Ravi Jairam and Stephen Breary. I did not document the reason for these visits from Lucy in my notes. I documented the coping strategies given to Lucy. I feel privileged at being asked to support Lucy over such a lengthy period and to support Lucy over these very hard times for her. The whole process was very difficult for me, especially with the process taking so long. So I want people to note as well that there's this massive gap here in this letter. Now, it could be that was the way the original was presented. There's no gaps in the rest of it. So I wonder if that has been taken away. But of course, this is speculation. It may not have been at all. But I just found it very strange that there's a gap. But nevertheless, regardless of that, we haven't seen 80% of this note, and more than 80%, 87.5%, because we haven't seen 7 of the 8 pages. So who knows what's written on the other pages? We certainly don't know because they haven't been made public. You know, in common with the insulin document that was posted for one day and then taken away because it related to the third insulin case that I'll be discussing in a future video. So when we look at the picture related to Kathryn de Beger as a whole, it's clear that Lucy was feeling a lot of distress and that Kathryn de Beger has expressed this both in her statements and also when speaking with the Thirlwell inquiry when being questioned by the lawyers that were part of that inquiry. It's also clear that Lucy has written this note as part of a counselling session and that this has been corroborated. So obviously that places the note in a completely different context, even a more significantly exculpating context than just the content of the note itself. The content of the note itself clearly indicates that it's not a confession note, but then when we look at this contextual information as well, that becomes even more clear. So if we return to the green note, we see, I've been through all the expressions indicating either innocence or despair on the note, but we see the not good enough phrase right at the top. The immediate comment, there are no words. We see these comments of self-loathing, despair, I can't breathe, I can't focus, no hope, despair, panic, fear, why me? All of this whirlpool of emotions that's been described, it's exactly the way that it's been described by counselling professionals, by psychotherapy professionals, and to be honest, it should be easily observable by anyone. It just has been presented in a way that is completely unreasonable and inaccurate. And the police, if the police had any intention of investigating dispassionately, even this note alone they should have seen was not a confession. But considering the other notes that we're going to look at as well, the idea that these collectively constitute a confession and constitute the communication of a guilty person is utterly ridiculous. But obviously they're too stupid to realise that. The prosecution knows damn well that it's not a confession, and we'll come on to that later. But the police, essentially they're just too stupid to realise that this has no merit as a piece of evidence. But it's been presented, the media has reported at the time in a way that I think is despicable generally, because there was a reasonable defence put up in court. It could have been a lot better in my opinion, but that was so rarely communicated contextually to people, and that's why people still believe this note is significant. It's not significant at all. It's absolutely in no way a confession, but there you go. So we're going to move on now to this blue post-it note. So this begins with Lucy saying, can't go to AH, that looks like. I'm not entirely sure what that says. Probably a medical person will know. Clinical area, and will be, I think that says disciplined. Anticipate another 6/12. So something's been edited out there, and then I think it says and cons. Police naming me, and then this is the critical part of this note. Obviously no evidence and would have been spoken to, but still upsetting. So Lucy's aware the police are there, and we don't know exactly when this note was written, but Lucy's aware of a police presence of some sort. This is obviously seems to be it must be prior to arrest, clearly. And this is a very critical expression and phrase that she's used here, that there's obviously no evidence. Because had she carried out these murders, had she deliberately poisoned infants with insulin, she would know very well that there could be evidence. So she couldn't be as emphatic and as calm as she is, because she would have the demeanour of a guilty person. She would know that she was guilty, and she would know there's a very good chance the police would uncover evidence. This is a note that is written in a much calmer tone than the green note that we've seen already, in which Lucy doesn't even seem remotely concerned about the police naming her. Now, that's the behaviour of someone who believes themselves to be innocent. She believes herself to be innocent, and so she's calm. She just thinks, well, I'll be vindicated by this process. I'll be exonerated by it. And then there's some talk about occupational health in the final paragraph, supporting me how they can, but can't confirm 100% I didn't do anything or anyone else until it's finished. So again, this is her knowing that she hasn't done anything wrong, but also she's talking about other people. So she's thinking, well, I still believe my colleagues. I don't believe anyone else on the unit has done anything wrong either, which if she had been the culprit and if she was guilty, she wouldn't have to think about anyone else. She indeed wouldn't be thinking about anyone else. Think about this logically from a psychological point of view. If you've murdered babies, if you know that you've murdered babies, if the police are investigating, the last thing you're going to be doing is thinking about, oh, I wonder if anyone else on the unit has been fingered. I wonder if anyone else is okay. There's just no way you'd be doing that. You'd be thinking, my God, they're onto me. The walls are closing in on me. There's no indication of this whatsoever. And then as we move into the second page, I'll just zoom in slightly on this because there's nothing on the bottom of the note. So something about mediation, says disciplinary, but this will be a person's name, said can't discipline them, it's voluntary and that will never change. So be prepared it may never happen. So this is just about internal processes at the hospital. And then she says, occupational health lady, prepare tomorrow, might make me think of all the things I'm missing out on. So I think it's likely that this note is chronologically the first of the 6 that we're going to look at in this video. She's here referencing a meeting with occupational health representative, and she doesn't use her name. We'll see later in these notes that Kathryn de Beger's name is written many times. So this is before her first meeting, and I would suggest at some point during those occupational health meetings, Kathryn de Beger has said to Lucy, you want to try this brain dumping technique as it's sometimes described. And then that's when the notes have been, this outpouring of emotion, this whirlpool of emotions that have been described elsewhere. But notice that she's more concerned really about internal processes at the hospital, occupational health, and just getting back on the unit than she is about any police action. Now, these are clearly the actions of an innocent person. This is a person who believes herself to be innocent because she knows that she's innocent. The next note we're going to look at is this yellow note that has some critical information on that, again, is indicative of a woman that is innocent and also that is in a very traumatized state of mind. So simply the fact that she's written help right in the middle of the page in that very bold way and then underlined it is indicative of where she is at this point. You can see instantly she's put hate my life here. But I'll go up and we'll go through the note as a whole. So it begins with this writing here that is barely even comprehensible. Perhaps someone else can interpret that. I don't even know what she's trying to say there, but it's not really indicative of someone who's in the best state of mind. And then a lot of this is listing the people, the animals that have meant a lot in her life. I don't like to call animals animals. They're equal to people as far as I'm concerned. Pets, friends. You know, I consider them friends as well. So, but I just thought I should mention their pets. So the entities in her life that have been important to her, the creatures, the beings, perhaps. So we see here Kathryn de Beger written. We'll see that written in other notes as well. She's written here, my best friend, and then this is blocked out. So it's hard to say whether this is referencing her best friend or whether she's saying Kathryn de Beger is her best friend. Probably the person that's been blocked out. I don't know. But, you know, we see here, I can't do this anymore. She's writing her cat's down, Tigger. And then we come to a key phrase here. Today is your birthday, but you can't be here, and I am so sorry for that. So in any normal context, this would not be seen. Some people have tried to attempt to interpret this as an indication of guilt, like she's feeling guilty because today's their birthday and they can't be here. But it's in any normal context, this is much more consistent with someone who feels upset for someone, who feels empathy for someone. And of course, serial killers are not known for their very high levels of empathy. It's not something that you typically associate with a serial killer, that they'll feel sorry. And as I mentioned previously, it's very rare for serial killers to reference their specific victims and humanize them. I'm not aware of any example of that happening. You can sometimes get a more kind of generalized remorse, but they have to depersonalize the victim. Sometimes they're so broken that they don't even have to go through the process of depersonalization. They're mentally gone. But for example, I know from the case of Jeffrey Dahmer that he said somehow if you're killing someone, if you can dehumanize or depersonalize them, it makes it easier. And I'm sure other serial killers have felt that way as well. Others are just psychopaths and enjoy killing people. But it's very rare, very, very extremely rare. I've not encountered an example from studying numerous cases in which a serial killer has really humanized an individual, unless they're defending themselves to the police. Not in a private note, not in private moments and private thoughts. This is just not consistent with that. And then she goes on, Smudge, this is her cat. I'm sorry that you couldn't have a chance at life. So further expressions of remorse and sympathy. I can't quite read this. there's something about, I mean, it almost says, yeah, so here she says, kill myself. So we can see here that she's suicidal. And she did mention that during police interviews. She said that she was suicidal. I'm not sure if it came up in the court. I believe that was in police interviews. I don't think it was during the court case. I think it was during police interviews she indicated explicitly she was suicidal. So again, that's quite rare among serial killers. They tend to feel bad. There can be circumstances in which serial killers feel bad about what they're doing, but they really want to kill themselves because this aspect of being murderous, that becomes part of their identity. So they don't tend to feel the same. They don't tend to feel a level of guilt that would result in them wanting to kill themselves. The reason she wants to kill herself is not because she feels guilty about murdering children, which there is no indication of that in any of these notes. The reason that she feels guilty is because she thinks she should have saved the child. She feels awful about the infants dying, and she feels a lot of trauma because of everything that she's being put through. And this note is absolutely indicative of that, as are the other notes. The green note is indicative of that as well, but this is almost solely indicative of that. And she writes, love and for the pain that you're... It's not entirely clear, but again, she's talking about the pain of the infants. And she writes whiskey, so this is her childhood dog. So she's remembering all the things in life that she's loved. Oh yes, so pain that the parents must experience every day. So again, she's empathizing, she's thinking about the parents. So again, this is just not indicative of someone that's deliberately harmed. It just isn't. That the last thing they do is like humanize their victims and start thinking about their relatives. It just doesn't happen. And then there's more indication that she's in a very traumatized state by this long spiel that isn't really readable. And then she goes, we tried our best and it wasn't enough. Again, not indicative of someone that's killed someone. We tried our best and it wasn't enough. Obviously that indicates an expression, we tried our best on the unit and someone died. I can't do it anymore. Obviously she's experiencing trauma. I don't know if many people will think of you today or any day, but I do. Again, very strongly indicative of empathy and sympathy towards these parents. Always remember, because you should be remembered, I can't do this anymore. I want someone to help me, but they can't. So what's the point? Hey, what's the point in asking? Hate my life. So very, very clear here. We see Lucy empathizing with infants and the families of those infants who have died. We see Lucy in a very traumatized state, feeling very desperate, feeling that she's being victimized, essentially. We see her very emotional. We see her in a very downbeat state. We see her desperate for help, and we see her suicidal. Now, if you put those things together collectively, this is not the note of someone that is guilty, clearly. There can't be a single person in the world that possibly thinks that this note was written by a guilty person. I really feel for anyone that believes that, because they're just incapable of thinking rationally about this. Anyone that thinks about this rationally can see very clearly that this is the note of a traumatized person who is completely innocent. So moving on, here we have the second yellow note. This one is much less regularly exhibited than the other yellow note, but it has a pretty similar tone of desperation and anxiety and trauma, essentially. So if we go to the top here, it just immediately begins, please help me, help me. And then we see Tigger and Smudge again, their cats. And just some writing here for me that's just all joined together and, you know, not even writing in a way that she normally would, but to me it's not legible. Not something wants, carer wants to help me, so again she's calling for help. I can't do it anymore, I can't live like this. No one will ever understand or appreciate what it's like. Then some more scribbles. Kathryn's written down again, Kathryn de Beger again. Someone didn't tell me something. Then she goes, it's worth not knowing. More scribbles. She talks about someone not giving a toss. Otherwise, she would have told me. Then some more things that are difficult to read here entirely, but going on about recriminations she has about certain people. And then at the bottom here, without going over all of this, because it's difficult to read, just written bastards. Someone help me, no one understands. So there's slightly more anger, you could say, in this about what she's being put through and who's putting her through it, and about how she's been let down and feels that she's been let down. Obviously, this is just mainly, again, someone who's traumatised, going through hell, feels victimised. And I want to make this crystal clear. I've mentioned this earlier in the video. Not only is this not the note of a guilty person, but there's no reference to anything. There's 6 notes that we're going to look at. In none of these notes is there any reference to anything specific to any of the supposed acts or any of the murders that's supposed to have happened or any of the children in the court case, apart from saying, I'm sorry about these infants, it's very sad, I feel sorry for the parents. There's nothing specific about their circumstances, there's nothing specific about any murderous acts or anything like that. They're not referenced in any way, which is consistent across all of her communications online, all of her communications in her notes, all of her communications in text messages. Everything about her life has been excavated, and we've seen the less than 1% of evidence that the police thought was significant. Over 99% of what they recovered has been thrown away, and at the end of it, what is left really has no substance whatsoever, and certainly doesn't specifically reference anything that would indicate any malignant acts. So that really is the most significant thing for me. But again, we see in the second yellow note that Lucy is in a very traumatised state and struggling to cope with the situation, a situation that we already know has made her suicidal. So then finally, there are these 2 white notes. These haven't been displayed an enormous amount in the media, but of the 2, the one that's on the screen now has been the more readily displayed. So we'll go through this one. This one is really quite random and difficult to read. It's a lot of thoughts about her feelings. We see here there's this I loved you expression. There's a lot of Tigger and smudge written on this as well. I couldn't save you. It's like my best friend written. Please help me. Again, there's this thing of writing lots of words together in one long word. I can't do this anymore again. Please help me. Help me, help. There's smudge and Tigger written all over it. I don't think I'm going to go through the entire thing. This time we see more references here, more references to love. There's nothing. This Kathryn de Beger's written down here again, I think, as Tigger and smudge. This Karen Reese, I think, is a close friend of hers. This is very clearly, again, a woman who's in an anguished state, who's going through trauma, who's reflecting on her important relationships and just wanting help in what is a horrible situation. There's nothing that references any murders here or anything of that nature that can even be remotely interpreted that way. So I think to go through the whole thing is probably not worthwhile. And then there's this note as well that is particularly rarely being seen. Again, we see love, Tigger and smudge, same similar things being written over this. Kathryn de Beger's here. Karen Reese's name is written down again. Help me. It's just very similar to the other white note with lots of Whiskey the dog. This is a childhood dog's written down again several times in this one. So I mean, this is again very indicative of a note that's been put together as part of an exercise. I mean, it would seem unusual for her to be thinking back of a childhood pet and then writing that down several times. So she could have been thinking about writing down relationships that have been important to her over the years. She's even written her own name down here briefly. But there's not much of, just again help me numerous times here. So there's not much of any of substance in this note. It really is again someone that's in an anguished state, wanting help, thinking about their key relationships, thinking about people that they have relied on, can rely on, that are important to them, etc. I believe that she'd been separated probably from her cats at this stage, which would, if I was separated from my dog, that would be devastating. So I'm sure that's a big part of why she's written their names down so many times and is hurting so much. And that's all this is just someone who's suffering. So if we return to the green note, early on in this note, she says, among these other aspects, these expressions of despair, such as wanting to kill herself, having no hope, having despair, she also says here, I'll never have children or marry, I'll never know what it's like to have a family. And that leads me to this final document involving Kathryn de Beger, which is a text message conversation that she had with Lucy at some point. And they're just having a very normal conversation here about being in Liverpool, going shopping, are you doing nice over the weekend? Anything nice over the weekend? This is Lucy speaking. Have you had a nice quiet week without me? And then she said, missed you, but glad you've had a good week. Happy shopping. I'm going shopping tomorrow to try and get out for my son's wedding. And then she says, where are you going shopping? And they talk about going to the Trafford Centre. You'll have to ease the pain with coffee, cake and a meal out. And then they just continue talking about this. And whether she's... Kathryn de Beger has got a wedding outfit. She's going to a wedding. And so it goes on with them just having a very normal conversation that two women would have. She's talking about bread sauce here and stuffing. And then this comes to an end. She's going to go and meet her. This is in April 2017, just very shortly before the case is referred to the police. And what you see here is just a very normal woman who has very normal concerns. There's no indication whatsoever of the kind of... And this isn't just in this conversation, but across everything we've seen about Lucy Letby, there is no indication of anything that would point to a serial killer. There's none of the psychology, there's none of the delinquency, there's none of the breakdown, there's none of the macabre interests, there's none of the disintegration in her personality. She just remains a very normal social person who thinks about others, who's empathetic, who's kind and caring. She's even having this conversation with Kathryn de Beger when we know she's in a very traumatised, very anguished state, and yet she's more concerned. Are you okay? Are you going to go to a wedding? Have you chosen your outfit? Are you going to have a nice day out? And this is who she is as a person. That's why she became a nurse in the first place. So I think it's very sad to look back at moments like this, and also the fact that she had a nursery in her house that she hadn't decorated over, because she wants to have children, as I just mentioned, and it looks very likely this has been taken away from her completely, along with her profession, along with her life, along with her peace of mind, along with her psychological stability. She's been given no chance to defend herself. She had no defence in court, or not a good enough defence. We've just seen the whole weight of the system bearing down on her, and they've destroyed her life. They've absolutely destroyed her. And I'm still hopeful that she can come out of prison and still have a happy life and be relatively psychologically healthy and find her feet again and find meaning and find purpose, as other people have. As I mentioned, Kathleen Folbig, I was very close to her in London, and she couldn't have been better adjusted. It was amazing. I'm hopeful that can be the future for Lucy, but people occasionally make comments about how much I've worked on this and so forth, and I just won't stop until this is overturned, because I think that if you see this level of injustice and you can do something, then you should. And I want to do the maximum that I'm capable of doing for as long as I can. I don't usually get very emotional about the whole situation, because it's important for me to remain very laser focused on the facts of the case. But just when I've been saying these words now, I did feel a bit emotional because occasionally the enormity of what you're doing hits you and you realise the horror of this whole situation and how painful it must be for Lucy and particularly for her parents. I mean, her parents must be suffering like you cannot believe. And that's why I've done so much work on this and why I will continue to do it and why I'll never stop until it's overturned. And I think that not only is it about Lucy, it's about whether or not, most importantly, it's about whether or not you're guaranteed a fair trial in this country. And when I began this journey, I thought you were, for some bizarre reason. I realised I was an idiot now. But obviously now I know that you're not guaranteed a fair trial, and that's a very serious issue. And we can see across these notes as a whole that there is just no indication of any confession. In these notes, collectively, there are essentially 5 themes. There are general expressions of anguish and trauma. There are comments related to loved ones and important relationships in Lucy's life. There are expressions of regret and empathy with the parents that have lost infants. There are strong indications that Lucy is feeling suicidal, and there are reflections on her life being torn apart. Collectively, these are very normal outpourings of emotion as expressed earlier in the video. And then there are 6 important things to note when it comes to whether or not these really constitute a confession. The first thing is that the one phrase that has been highlighted by the prosecution has a logical explanation that has been provided in court and police interviews quite extensively, in fact. The second thing is that there are no references to any malicious acts. Thirdly, there are no references to any murders. Fourthly, there are no references to methods of murder. Fifthly, there are no references to specific infants, apart from the one reference to, which is even not particularly specific, but one reference to twins that had passed away, and Lucy Letby expressed regret about this. And the 6th thing is that there are no references to specific acts. There is no conceivable way that these notes can be taken as a confession. So returning to the court transcripts, it's not as if this wasn't discussed in court. It's not as if this wasn't conveyed during court proceedings. So I'm going to read through a little bit of this. And what's that describing when it says there are no words, I can't breathe, I can't focus, overwhelming fear and panic? That's how I felt about my life at that moment in time. Under that it says, I haven't done anything wrong. Why does it say I haven't done anything wrong? Because I haven't done anything wrong. Who are you writing this note for or to? It wasn't to anyone. It was just me processing my thoughts. It was never meant to be read by anyone. Can you just help us with why it says police investigation on the left-hand side under that? Because I knew that ultimately the worst case scenario would be that the police would be involved and that was something that had been threatened by the hospital. Why under that does it say, if you can help us, slander, discrimination? That's how I felt about the trust in the hospital. That's how I felt they were towards me, that it was slander and discrimination. And what was slander and discrimination? The allegations. Under that it says, all getting too much. What follows on from all getting too much? When we look at the note, if anything follows on, everything's taking over my life. I think it's everyone, and I feel very alone and scared. All right, is that how you were feeling? Yes. I want to look across to the right-hand side, if we could for the time being, reading down the right. I'm an awful person. I pay every day for that right now. You tell me if I read anything incorrectly, by the way. Yes. Why are you saying I'm an awful person? I pay every day for that right now. Because at that time I did feel that I must be an awful person to have made any mistakes that had harmed anyone, and that I was paying the price for that by what had happened to me. And what had happened to you at this point, as best you can remember? I'd been taken away from the job that I loved and accused of things that I just hadn't done. Underneath it says, I'll never have children or marry. Can you read the next bit? I'll never know what it's like to have a family. Right, why were you saying that? Because at that time I couldn't see any future for myself. I couldn't imagine what my life was going to be or that I'd ever have a future. This is all your handwriting, do you agree? It is, yes. Why have you written no hope at an angle towards the side of the note on the right hand side? Because there were times when I didn't have any hope. My whole situation felt hopeless at times. And at that same kind of angle, a bit below that, it says despair. Can you see that? Yes. What is that describing? Again, one of the emotions that I was feeling at that time. Just to the left of despair, it says, I hate myself so much for what this has. And then it's hard to read. We can perhaps scroll down a bit there. Does it follow with anything, or does it just run out what this has? I believe it just runs out there, I think. It says, I hate myself so much for what this has. And then we can see a circle heavily in ink and the word hate in it. Yes. Why did you hate myself so much for what this has? Why did you say that in the note? Because at the time I did hate myself. You said in the note, I haven't done anything wrong. So people might think, well, how do you hate yourself if you haven't done anything wrong? Because I was made to feel that I had done something wrong, so potentially I thought I had been incompetent in some way. What kind of mental state were you in at this time when you were writing this note? Not good at all. Had you been to see the doctor by this time, or do you not know? I couldn't say, but throughout the period my mental health was poor. How well were you coping with the situation you were in? I did my best, but it was difficult in the circumstances with the isolation that I felt. And yeah, it was difficult. We know you were arrested in July 2018. How long a period was this kind of thing going on for, and these sort of thoughts going on for? 2 years. Carrying on looking across the left-hand side again now, following from where it says, can you see, how can I get through it? Do you see that, Miss Letby? Yes. How can I get through it? What's directly under that, please? Could you read the next? How will things ever be like they were? Then if we carry on the left-hand side, it says, I don't deserve to live. Is that what it says? Yes. So from that point on, it then goes on to discuss the not good enough expression that was mentioned earlier in the note. So it's not as if this wasn't expressed to the court. It's not as if this wasn't explained. It's not as if this wasn't made crystal clear. But I want people to reflect on how little we've heard about that in the media, to such an extent that people still wonder, even though I still think they can do a better job on these notes, they did address what was written in the notes far more than I think many people realise to this day. And that's because the reason we don't know about that is because, firstly, transcripts are suppressed in this country, and you have to pay £100,000 to get a court transcript. And secondly, because court reporting did not reflect this in the slightest. So people still have a completely false impression of the court case. I had a false impression in the past. I still think they could have done a better job, and they could have got in journaling experts, they could have got in other experts. They really could have given this more of a hammering than they did, but they did indicate precisely the explanation for this note, and it's very clear that it's not a confession. Very clear. So I'm now going to return in this final segment to earlier in the court case, just a few moments before the section that we've just discussed. And Ben Myers here is making a comment. Right, we're going to track across this. It says on the left, there are no words. That seems to carry on the left-hand side. I can't breathe, I can't focus. Perhaps you could read it, Miss Letby. And at this point, Nick Johnson, Casey, makes an objection. Now, I've seen very little objection from Ben Myers at any stage, but Nick Johnson, Casey, says, the objection isn't to my learned friend reading the words, it's to him interpreting that one bit that follows the other. I'd rather the witness said which bit was written by. So he's interjecting here because he knows that this is a key item of evidence in the court case, and he's just essentially trying to disrupt them. There's nothing here that is happening. I mean, he's literally just reading the note out, and of course Nick Johnson is trying to interrupt that. The reason that the gentleman on your screen now, Nick Johnson, the prosecuting barrister, is trying to interrupt this is that he knows damn well that this isn't a confession note. There is no way that he can conceivably believe that this is a confession note. He knows absolutely that this is a key item of evidence in the prosecution case, and he knows that item of evidence has absolutely no merit whatsoever. He knows very well that this isn't a confession, and he knows very well, looking across all the confession notes, so-called confession notes, that they don't constitute a confession. He's not stupid. He's far from stupid. He knows the evidence he's introducing into the court case has absolutely no merit whatsoever, and he knows what he's going to claim about it in the court case also has absolutely no merit whatsoever. So that's why he's trying to interrupt and obstruct what the defence is doing. Now, I'll cut the police some slack. The police are as thick as two short planks, so they could very easily believe that this was a confession. Nick Johnson knows, he knows damn well this is not a confession. So I just want everyone who's watching this video to be clear on that, and to understand that, and to understand that he deliberately misrepresented this note in court, and he knows extremely well that this is not a confession note. So in conclusion, when we look at these notes in their totality, it's crystal clear that there is no confession in these notes, and everything that is written in these notes is consistent with the mindset of someone who would be innocent and the way that they would be feeling in these circumstances. We can furthermore conclude that not only was this used erroneously by the prosecution, but the prosecution absolutely knows that there's no confession in these notes. This is particularly important because I still encounter people, and we've still been encountering people on our TikTok channel, for example, who will say, Lucy confessed, it was in a note. And this is part of the reason for making this video, is that I want to show thoroughly that these are not suspicious notes in any way, and that there's certainly no confession in them, and that it doesn't make any sense to read them that way, and do a thorough job of going through all the notes that are available. And then also we'll try to put a shortened version of this on TikTok so that it can be digested in a shorter format. But this is just something that should never have been in the court case. The police, if they had any intelligence, would have recognised that these were not confession notes and that there was nothing suspicious about what's written in these notes. Unfortunately, they failed to do that, and they put it into the court case, and this was one of 3 key items of evidence in my estimation. 2 of those 3 we know have absolutely no merit whatsoever. So there's this confession note and the shift chart saying Lucy was always on shift. They can be trashed immediately. The 3rd key item is the Inchling cases that I've been working through steadily, and I will make some more videos about them in the future. But we can entirely put to bed the idea that the note that was exhibited in court is a confession note. There's just simply no evidence to support this. Finally, I'd just like to make a little request in this video, at the end of this video, for people to follow me on Twitter, or x.com as it's often referred to now. I still think it was Twitter, but obviously my real name is out there now, so I've been using a Twitter account that has my dog's name on it. That's not really necessary anymore, so I need to start building a Twitter profile, and the reason for that is that eventually, I'll be going more public than I am now, even though I am semi-public now, and I need to have a Twitter profile. I'll be having a blue tick on this profile, and I guess I'll be doing similar things to Svelena Dimitrova, where I'll be writing various things. I probably won't do an enormous amount, but I'll be retweeting things, and I will tweet occasionally as well. I'm not someone that's a big fan of Twitter, although I've seen with this Lucy Letby case how it can be really useful as an activist platform. But it's important for me to have a profile on there, basically just to protect my own identity. So if you could follow me on there, I'd like to try and build a following on Twitter, as much as part of me just wishes the platform just didn't exist at all. Unfortunately, it does exist, so it's something that I need to kind of deal with. So if you do enjoy my videos and you do watch them, and you're watching this one, then it would be very much appreciated if you could follow me on Twitter. It's just this address here, @cpmorris1234. If you could follow me there, then I would really appreciate it. Apart from that, thank you for watching. If you have any queries, comments, or observations, please leave them in the comments section, and I'll look forward to reading them.